Order, order. Good morning and welcome, Secretary of State. Thank you for coming and appearing before us this morning as we're all in festive mood ahead of Christmas, and we're looking forward to the gifts that you will be able to share with the committee this morning. Ofsted's report last week, what are the sort of key lessons you take from that?
Well, I thought that there were several. I think the first thing to say is that since Sir Michael Wiltshaw's taken over as Chief Inspector, I think he's been a brilliant leader of Ofsted, and he's put the emphasis absolutely where it should be, not just on raising the bar, but also on closing the gap and helping disadvantaged children in particular. And I think, as ever, as a fair-minded teacher would, he mixed both praise and encouragement to do better. The praise was there for those schools which have improved, and we do see that there's been, as he recorded, the biggest change in Ofsted's history, or in inspections history, in schools now ranked as good or outstanding, which is again a cause for celebration. But he also pointed out quite rightly that there are far too many parts of the country where standards are still not high enough.
And what do you propose to do about that?
Well, I think one of the things that Sir Michael pointed out was that some of what we're already doing is addressing the problems that he's identified. So if one looks specifically at the question of unequal performance, he's right in drawing attention to the fact that unlucky children tend to be poorer children, not just in poorer communities, but poorer children sometimes do worse in areas of relative affluence. Everything that we were doing, from the pupil premium to the changes in how our accountability system operate, are intended to address that. And as ever in education, as for example the PISA statistics showed, it takes a bit of time before changes feed through, changes in policy feed through to changes in behaviour and then results.
But he identified leadership as being essential,
Yes.
and he identified the fact that if you look at the areas of the country, often the East Coast, where there is underperformance, there is a lack of the national leaders in education, the local leaders in education. So we have a surfeit in areas that probably need them least, and we have a lack in areas where we need it most. And I think one could read into his report that there is a lack of a national strategy to ensure the deployment of effective leaders in the places they're most needed.
Yes.
Do you think that criticism is fair?
With the exception of the words national strategy, but we can put that to one side, yes, I do think that it is, as we constantly strive to do better, and as some problems are solved, and as everyone acknowledges, for example, one of the biggest problems that we inherit, well, the predecessor government had actually, was underperformance in London, and now that's been significantly tackled, but not, of course, completely. So attention shifts elsewhere. And there are some particular challenges, you're absolutely right, sometimes because of coastal communities, sometimes because you've had local authorities like Norfolk and Suffolk that haven't done the right thing. We are attempting to address that through a variety of tools. One of them was outlined in outline by the Deputy Prime Minister in the speech that he gave a couple of months ago. Some attention was paid to the fact that he helpfully reminded us of Liberal Democrat commitments made at their spring conference. Less attention was paid to what I thought was an excellent outline in how we could ensure and incentivise good leaders to work in some of those underperforming schools. And that's one of the central tasks that Charlie Taylor is undertaking at the National College, both growing the number of national leaders and making sure they're deployed more effectively.
And how do you rate the performance of the National College in providing this leadership?
I think that Charlie Taylor's been doing a brilliant job, but I think, as ever, we are seeking to address a problem that has been highlighted by the fact that success in other areas draws attention to those areas where we might have considered them to be coasting beforehand, but now their performance really is giving us cause for concern. And there are also particular demographic challenges in some of those parts of the country, in some coastal communities everywhere from not just East Anglia, but as you know well, further north.
I mean, you've described, you made it specific to Charlie Taylor, the Chief Executive, but I mean, we've had criticism that the National College for Leadership itself is not providing much in the way of leadership. Do you reject that entirely?
I absolutely reject that.
Overall, you think they're doing a brilliant job?
Well, I think that Charlie is doing an excellent job, and I think that the team with whom he works are doing an excellent job. having worked with Charlie, I would know that he is his own sternest critic. But I think that there are some people who hanker after a particular approach towards the National College operating, which is not the approach that we should have in what is increasingly a school-led, self-improving system. And I think that...
but there must be a role for it. You wouldn't have
Yes.
it if you didn't think there was a role for it. And if there are swathes of the country where there is a lack of leadership, and you've got a national college
Yes.
for leadership, that would suggest that it was doing a less than brilliant job.
Well, it would suggest that there's been a problem that's been exposed, and that problem has originated in the past. I don't want to criticise previous leaders of the National College because I think that they've all done a good job. But I do think it is the case that there are systemic problems in that we have an insufficient number of national and local leaders of education, particularly in the areas that you mention. But the number of national and local leaders of education has increased. Obviously, it's the case that you can't carry on being a national leader of education unless you operate energetically in the right way. And I do think that there are examples of great leadership in some of the areas where we've been underperforming in the past. Some of that great leadership, of course, has been driven by the Academies programme and also by the challenge provided by free schools. If we're thinking about outstanding leaders in the east of England, then it's impossible to ignore the impact of someone like Rachel de Souza, who took over an underperforming primary school in the south of Norwich and is now leading an academy chain across Norfolk. Similarly, the department was criticised in the past for the growth in the number of free schools in Suffolk. People have said, yes, there are surplus places in Suffolk, why do we need free schools? Well, one of the reasons we need free schools is that we need innovation and challenge, and we need to create an environment in which great leaders can be tempted to come to that county.
Thank you. As we did, I think, in January 2012, we went out to the world of Twitter and asked
Yes.
people to send us questions for you. And we had excellent response with thousands of tweets and high-quality questions. So we will attempt, as best we can as a committee, and we'd ask you to join in as you always do,
Of course.
to get through as much as we possibly can and try to keep our questions and answers as short and punchy
Will do.
through the session. With that, turn to the subject of children's social care and Bill.
Thanks, Graham. Before I go on to children's care, just one question about what Sir Michael Walshaw said.
Yes.
He made some comments about grammar schools
Yes.
and disadvantaged children not getting a fair crack of the whip in terms of access to grammar schools. Do you agree with him?
I think looking at both grammar schools and Sir Michael, I have the same response. And that's what Billy Joel said in that great song of his, which I think all of us know, which is, don't go changing just to please me. I love you just the way you are. I love Sir Michael just the way he is. I love the grammar school contribution to state education just the way it is. And I think that's probably the best that can be said.
Okay, so does that mean no new grammar schools?
Yeah, well, the legislation says no new grammar schools. Of course, the legislation also allows grammar schools, like all good schools, to expand. And that expansion may mean that they acquire a new site. We may go on to discuss school places in due course on which to expand. But as you saw from the decision that I made last week, there is a line to be drawn between the legitimate expansion of successful schools, and grammar schools are, for the most part, outstanding schools whose contribution to excellent state education we should all celebrate. But there's a distinction to be drawn between legitimate expansion and a wholly new school, which, as you know, is forbidden in the law.
Thank you. I was wondering what Billy Joel song you were going to quote there for a moment. I'm sure Twitter will be a...
Well, I suppose in tribute to Pat, I could have said, Uptown Girl, but no, I was thinking,
Probably time to move on then.
Yes.
Yeah. On to children's services. In your speech to the NSPCC, you talked about the system of social care hitherto not been either systematic, radical or determined enough, and you announced 3 critical areas for reform. Well, if we turn to our first Ask Gove, I don't know who it was, what is your vision for the future for the children in care, and how do you plan to get there?
Okay, difficult to answer punctually, but the critical thing is I'd like to see more children taken out of homes where they are at risk more rapidly. So I'd encourage social workers to be more energetic and to be more challenging to shift the balance from concentrating primarily on developing a relationship with the adults in a household, to thinking more about the children at risk, taking children into care, therefore more quickly. Then, for children who are inevitably in some form of residential care, improving the quality of residential care. Some steps have been taken there. Improving the number of people who come forward to foster and adopt. Increasing the speed with which people can then find children can then find a permanent place, whether it is with, I hope, in as many circumstances as possible, adoptive parents or another secure setting. And then to make sure that children are in that setting and can be supported for as long as possible, and that we can do everything through the deployment of virtual school heads, the additional Pupil Premium Plus, and now Edward Timpson's decision to extend foster care for some who wish to be in foster care from 18 to 21, providing them with a nurturing and caring environment to help them through life.
Okay. The next ask that I'll put to you then is, do you believe that constant scrutiny and judgment of individuals is conducive to positive working environments and helpful for confidence?
Well, not constant, but regular, yes.
Okay. What do you mean by regular?
Well, I think it's important when we're dealing with the most vulnerable people in the greatest need, that we expect and demand the highest level of professionalism. And it would be the case that in any good children's services department, such as the ones that you've been responsible for in the past, Bill, that you and the Director of Children's Services and other managers would want to be certain that everything from record keeping to the management of caseloads were being properly and effectively scrutinised and managed.
Now, in your first answer, you talked about the what you would like to see from social workers: more intervention, early intervention, quicker decisions, children being taken into care. How are you responding to the cry for help from social workers struggling to cope under the weight of growing caseloads and reducing resources?
Yes, well, I do. I have enormous sympathy with the situation in which social workers find themselves. It's often the case that those who do have excessive caseloads are often people who are themselves poorly managed, and there is a challenge sometimes in that the quality of management and leadership of social workers is very variable. I would urge those local authorities which have a high vacancy rate, or social workers who feel that the caseload is too heavy, to look to those local authorities. Hackney is one that I would particularly highlight, that have remodelled the way in which they operate in order to ensure that the workload that individual social workers have is more effectively shared, and that the leadership that's shown by managers is more effectively directed.
Is there something from a national perspective that needs to happen to demonstrate support for social workers? You quite rightly, in my view, you make great play by the fact that we need great teachers, great leaders of teachers, in order to produce the right outcomes for children in school. Is there a similar process, and how does that come from a national?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think there is a similar process. I think if we look at social work, child protection, children's social care, I would say that the situation that we now face is rather similar to the situation that the Labour government faced with education, say, 10 years ago. And in the same way as the Labour government, the Blair government recognised that in order to take education to a higher level, they needed to make some changes, and one of those changes was to introduce a greater degree of diversity and innovation in supply. One of them was to concentrate on improving leadership, and another one, critically, was to concentrate on improving the quality of people entering the profession through things like Teach First and indeed the National College. So we've got to do the same thing now. So we need, as we've just been discussing, a greater degree of thought given to how social work departments are run, and the Hackney model provides a way forward, I think. But on the whole question of recruiting better people, firstly, there are some outstanding social workers there, and some of them have been playing a part in helping to shape our policy, and I should in particular mention Isabel Trout, who's been appointed as Chief Social Worker for children's social work. A brilliant person. I don't know if you've had the chance to talk to her at length in the department. She's a really impressive person, and the fact that she has that role and can provide professional leadership is, I think, highly effective. The second thing that I would mention is that the Prime Minister, in his speech at the Conservative Party conference, managed to do the impossible, which was to win praise from Polly Toynbee, and he did that by explicitly saying how important the role of social workers was in calling them modern-day heroes and heroines. Thirdly, I had the opportunity myself, both at the launch of Frontline, the new, in essence, Teach First for social work, and then subsequently in the speech that I gave to the NSPCC, to explain how highly I thought of social workers, and not in the abstract sense of giving them a hug and singing Kumbaya, but in the concrete sense of recognising that it is a uniquely difficult job that requires skills of emotional intelligence and intellectual rigour, which should rightly make us think that anyone who does the job of social worker well is performing a task both vital to society but also enormously demanding, and it should be celebrated.
So what can you do to ensure that social workers want to go and work in some of the more challenging places where currently social workers are clearly choosing not to?
Yes, well, I suppose a case in point is Doncaster. And one of the things that we're doing there is that we recognise that there have been problems for some time now, and with the cooperation of the new Labour mayor, we're setting up a trust arrangement there specifically in order to provide more space and more scope for effective leaders from and managers from social work to do as they did in Hackney with education through the establishment of the Hackney Learning Trust, have a body at one remove from the unhappy history of the past, capable of providing the quality of leadership required. And the model that we've adopted is one that was designed for us by Alan Wood, who's the Director of Children's Services at Hackney, another outstanding social worker, and also by Professor Julian Legrand, who is an ethical socialist and one of the leading thinkers in this area. So it's the sort of innovation which I find incredibly exciting, but also one that's clearly designed and shaped to meet and to respond to social workers' concerns rather than to fit anyone else's ideological blueprint.
I mean, why are you so confident that that kind of model will attract social workers want to work? And Doncaster is one example, or Birmingham is another.
Birmingham is a particular example, yes, and Alan and Julian are going to help us by looking at some of the problems in Birmingham as well. I can't know that it will work. But what I do think is that if you have some of the best people who are currently operating in the area and some of the smartest people who've been thinking about policy in this area, and then you ask them to come up with a new approach, and they recommend something that commends itself to everyone from the Labour mayor of the area to Conservative ministers, then it's definitely got to be better than the status quo.
Also read Secretary, that you, I welcome your comments on social workers, did I also read that you accused them of being idealistic and failing to ensure that people accepted personal responsibility?
Well, this reflects a concern that I have about social work education. Martin Neri has been conducting an investigation into social work education and training for us. That will be published in the new year. I hope that you'll have the chance to talk to Sir Martin and read his report. One of the concerns...
the new year covers a very long period.
Well, I hope that it will be published very early in the new year, in January or February, and I hope that you'll have the chance to talk to him shortly. Well, whenever you want to. But my particular concern is that there are some courses and some academics within social work that try to deprive people, in a sense, of agency or individual responsibility, because they overstress the importance of external factors in determining the circumstances and the circumstances in which people live and the decisions that they take. And I think it's very important that we do not have a situation where social workers are tempted to explain away poor decisions made by adults purely because of difficult socioeconomic circumstances, because, of course, tough times make life tougher, particularly for people in tough circumstances, but there is no excuse for some of the behaviour which places children at risk of abuse or neglect.
And you've seen evidence of that?
I have seen evidence of some of that work. I don't want to preempt Sir Martin's report, but I think when people read it, they will see that there is evidence that there are some academics and some courses where the emphasis is not where I imagine most of us would want it to be. If at the end of it you think that Sir Martin is wrong and that I'm wrong, I'm very happy to come back and
Thank you. Bill?
explore.
Yeah, back to Ask Gove. Will all local authorities with an inadequate rating have child protection responsibility removed from them?
Not always. I mean, the important thing to do is to recognise that it may be the case that a local authority recognises where the fault lies and wants to work with others in order to improve and is putting in place the appropriate steps to improve things. You know, we've got to have a degree of sensitivity. And as you've pointed out, you know, there are, or hinted at, there are some local authorities where, partly because of size and other reasons like Birmingham, where there are some real, you know, difficult challenges. But then there'll be others that are registered as inadequate, but the political and officer leadership recognise that and will want to work with others.
Sure. I think earlier you didn't quite answer the question about additional resources.
Sorry.
That's all right. I mean, one of the Ask Gove questions was, what are you going to do about maintaining early intervention stroke prevention services in order to manage social care overload, which is a resources question? Are you fighting for those extra resources?
Yes. Every time I talk to the Treasurer, I'm always asking for as much money as possible. Money's not the only answer. I think we would all acknowledge that, but it certainly makes things easier.
Okay.
Claire?
Thanks. Secretary of State, you'll be aware that the Select Committee is carrying out an inquiry into residential children's homes at the moment.
Yes.
And Edward Timpson came to see us a few weeks ago, and we talked then about the difficulties of establishing innovative practice in difficult financial circumstances. Now, he told us that the new innovation programme would help make available to children's services that face financial barriers to innovative practice. How much financial money, what are we talking about? How much money?
Well, at the moment, the innovation programme has just started, as it were. As Edward may have mentioned, we've asked Clive Cowdrey, who helped set up the Resolution Foundation, and who's both a highly successful businessman, but more importantly, someone who, having spent the earlier part of his life in care, has developed a sort of profound commitment to helping the most vulnerable, to work with us in order to, and indeed local authorities and professionals, to see what it was that was required in order to stimulate innovation. In a way, the recommendations that he will make will determine how much resource that we should allocate to supporting those areas of the country that need it. But as, for example, with Doncaster, one of the things that we said there, the three MPs quite rightly said, are Doncaster's already hard-pressed council taxpayers having to pay extra? And I said, no, it's the department that will bear the additional costs required to improve things.
What we're finding already is that there are local authorities, largely metropolitan and largely in the south, that are exporters of their children.
Yes.
To other local authorities where there is cheap housing, sometimes big housing, often on the coast, ex-boarding houses, etc. And those local authorities and those services are under massive pressure.
Yes.
And that is not good for the children involved. Now, to get London authorities particularly to start to look at running their own children's homes again, and I know that's part of your consultation at the moment, I think it's really good. That's not going to be cheap. So
No.
are we talking about insufficient funding, and is it both capital and revenue?
Well,
or is that just going to depend on what comes out of the review?
No. I know the related. You're absolutely right. The first question that Edward and I asked is: people who are directors of children's services are by definition people who care about doing the right thing. They're not going to willfully and arbitrarily say, do you know what, let's fling these children into the worst possible homes and forget about them. So I wanted to understand what the market pressures were and what the incentives were, which meant that people who were under pressure felt that they had to make these decisions. And as you quite rightly point out, some of it has to do with straightforward things like the cost of property. We have published more information than ever before about the location and the costs associated with these placements against some internal resistance from the sector. By so doing, we've already, I think, begun to identify some local authorities and indeed some providers who are doing things better, both more effectively in cash terms and also with better outcomes for children, and we can learn from that. But yes, while I won't put a price tag on it now, I do think that it is absolutely right that we should, if necessary, provide the additional funds in order to ensure that children are safe. And Edward's work at the moment is designed specifically to ensure that we improve the quality of residential care for our most vulnerable children and young people.
Thank you, and I welcome that, because I think whilst I agree with you that directors of children's services would not willfully or would not wish to willfully throw these children to
They're
the
under
worst
pressure.
possible homes, that unfortunately
Yeah.
is depressingly what we're finding.
Yeah, no.
Moving on to ASCO, why is there a different care leaving age for foster children than for those children in children's homes, given that the children in children's homes are very often the most difficult,
Yes.
the most vulnerable?
Precisely for the reason that you mentioned earlier and that we've just been discussing. Until we are absolutely certain that we've got the situation right with residential homes and the policies are properly, residential care and residential care homes and the policies are properly aligned, then we won't extend the age there. We've got to get the system right before extending the age. Fostering is different, but in due course, I have a completely open mind about raising matching the two.
Those children need help now, don't
They certainly do, but I think that the critical thing is, can we be certain that we're improving the quality of residential care?
The question is there something we can do for children right now who are ending up in with all of the poor outcomes as a result of that problem?
We are trying to, well, by making public, and not least by letting ministers and others know, the quality of the homes and where they are, we are putting pressure on local authorities to think hard about it, and we are asking some tough questions ourselves about why those decisions have been made in order to ensure that we can have more people being placed in higher quality accommodation. So the short answer is you're absolutely right, but we need to be certain about what interventions we make. We need to know what will definitely improve things before we instantly act. So we're in the process of working out exactly what's wrong and what's required. But you're absolutely right to say that we should seek to act as quickly as possible, consistent with not being knee-jerk.
Our Children First report on child protection had three key themes, you may remember: neglect, thresholds and older children.
Yes.
We recently received a memo from your department following up on our Children First report, which failed to mention older children at all. Will you now undertake to review how well the child protection system meets the needs of older children in particular?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the back of that, when we visited Margate, the part of the Thanet Authority, and we were impressed, I think worried as well, by the kind of social overlay picture that was given to us, because you had high concentrations of youngsters in the care system living in the town, high numbers of youngsters who left care but were kind of the 16-plussers living in really what looked like, giving the mapping of the situation, an almost ghettoised situation. And then overlaid on top of that was, because of the housing tenure and the nature of the housing in the area and the value of housing, people who were like ex-offenders, people who were sex offenders, all living in what looked like, on the mapping system, what could have been at any time a crisis community. Now, thankfully, they had it managed to a certain extent, but it really left us worrying about the welfare of those young people, particularly the care leavers, 16-plussers, who were kind of largely left to their own devices.
I went to exactly the same part of the world I went with the local MP, Laura Sands, talked to the police and children's services people there and saw the same situation. You're right, there are bail hostels and houses where there are individuals undergoing drug rehabilitation. And also there are homes which are being used, we know, by people with criminal connections from Eastern Europe and beyond. And it's absolutely the worst place to put vulnerable young people. And that's one of the reasons why we need to change.
But, as I was pointing out before, we've actually got London authorities exporting children there on a daily basis.
We have had for some time, and both Charlie Elphick, the MP for Dover, and Laura have been campaigning on this. Not in the sense that they're saying, keep the children out, but deliberately to say we want to do everything possible to help these children and young people, but the circumstances in which they're being placed are not, sensible. I mean, it's also the case that there are other parts of the country, including parts of East Lancashire and so on, where some of the homes there are very good, it has to be said, but where because property costs are cheaper, people are being placed, and it's not right.
I mean, the cost of the London authorities addressing this. I mean, the cost. I mean, Roger Gale has also been campaigning on this as an MP in the area, saying that you can get 7-8 bedroom sort of Victorian houses for well under £200,000. Now you compare that with the cost of a similar property if it exists in London, it is. I mean, which would be running to millions. Is the appetite there? I mean, it's all very well to say that one wants to change it, but it will cost an enormous amount of money to put right what is clearly a pernicious situation right now.
Well, firstly, it would not automatically necessarily be that. Yes, the appetite is there is the short answer. I can go on to say more, but yes, the appetite is there.
Okay, Alex.
Chair, the Secretary of State, you are the Secretary of State, and you've seen it for yourself, that these children are in this extremely vulnerable situation, probably even more vulnerable, possibly even more vulnerable than they were before they were moved there. Can you actually do anything about that personally by saying to an authority, don't put these children here?
Well, if I were to say to any individual local authority, don't do it, then the local authority would quite rightly say, well, where's the extra money coming from? We didn't do this, as Pat said, deliberately, willfully, because we don't care about these children. We're under some pressure. Now, I need to know...
So it's a financial matter?
No, not only a financial matter, it's partly a financial matter, because I need to know why it is...
If you give them a few more pounds, or a few more £1,000 for some of these individual children, couldn't they be accommodated in a place that's safe, rather than a place that's unsafe?
But what's interesting is that there are some local authorities that are placing children in residential homes which are suitable and which are significantly cheaper than some which are more expensive and more at risk. So there is a relationship, but it's not an absolutely direct relationship between cost and quality.
But surely when we know of a particular situation where there are children placed in a vulnerable situation, we should be doing something directly about it. Surely you have the powers to do that.
Well, we're trying now to work out exactly what it is that we should do. The most important thing to recognise is which local authorities are doing the right things in the right way for the right reasons. How can we encourage others to do exactly the same thing? But it would be, I think, and I absolutely appreciate the emotional and rhetorical force behind the question, but I don't think it would be appropriate for me to second guess every individual decision about where every individual child in care is placed by every individual local authority.
So whilst we all talk about it, the children remain in a vulnerable situation?
Well, the children are in a vulnerable situation, but it's not the case that we are just talking about it. I think that's unfair both to the local authorities that are working with us and also to Edward Timpson. This issue would not be on the map in the way that it is if it weren't for, as well as the Select Committee's work, Edward's work as well. And I don't think, I may be being unfair to previous holders of this post, I don't think there's any minister that has been as energetic or as determined to deal with this situation, or any minister that has put more information in the public domain or been more determined to challenge local authorities to do better in the way which you quite rightly want.
Does
Bill, I'm going to come to Pat next. Can you come through?
Minister, can I just bring you back to the spend to save issue?
Yes.
Because I think that the consultation that's out at the moment is excellent, and part of that consultation is that no child should be placed more than 20 miles
Yes.
from their home local authority. I think that that's the shock that the system needs.
Yes.
But you will need a huge amount of capital funding behind that.
Yes.
Is the priority within the department to make sure that that capital funding is there? 'Cause- and are you serious about the 20 miles?
Yes.
And
There are always...
you will ensure that the funding is available, because it's about priorities, isn't it? 1.3 billion pounds made available for free schools. You're equally committed to finding this funding to bring these children back.
Well, we're absolutely committed to making sure... Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Does the plight of the most vulnerable children who need the most support in our society have sufficient attention from you as Secretary of State, given your other responsibilities?
I don't think it can ever have enough attention. But what I would say is... The reason I pause is that I hate providing a running commentary on myself. So I don't know if it gets enough attention from me. I hope it does, but it's one of the questions that I ask myself every day and every week. Am I using my time as effectively as possible to help the most vulnerable children? And are we doing as much as we can? I don't know. Others must judge whether it's enough.
Thank you. And move on to the subject of careers. Oh, we're going to ask Alex, before
Yes.
we move on.
Last Friday night, I spent some time with young people from the Eastern Ravens Trust. They're all young carers, and they've developed their own policies. Great organisation, but they've asked if I could put a couple of questions to you from them. So maybe not the exact words they put, but does the Secretary of State agree that all schools should have a young carers policy, which clearly states how the school will support young carers?
I'm very wary about insisting that every school has a policy for X, Y and Z, however important the needs of those individuals are. I do think it's the case that every school which is well led should take account of the specific needs, not just of young carers, but of other children who may face additional responsibilities or strains or pressures on their home life. So I'd worry about saying you need to have a policy for young carers, because then you can have a proliferation of policies for each individual group of children or young people who are genuinely in need. What I would prefer to say is every school needs to think about the specific needs of children and young people, and of course young carers have a variety of needs which teachers and the school leadership need to be sensitive to.
Well, some of them, they'll find that answer quite helpful, but I think they'll also be disappointed that because they have just actually developed their own policy which they want to promote to local schools. Are they wasting their time then? Wouldn't you encourage them to encourage the schools to adopt their policy and their thinking about how they should maybe be cared for?
Well, the one thing I would say is, I would applaud their initiative in doing it. B, I'm sure that local schools would want to, at the very least, pay close attention, if not actively adopt. And I'd encourage schools to take close account of the voice of students who have thought carefully about how their particular needs can be addressed. And if, Alex, you can pass on their model policy to me, then I'd be very happy to read it and to write back to them and you with my thoughts on it.
Well, I think you've just won another couple of brownie points there for the young people, but they actually tell me that, lots of young people who are carers are not actually identified, and they want to know, what is government going to do to try and raise the profile of young carers and ensure that they are identified and appropriately supported.
Well, I would say again that in Parliament, irrespective of what government's done, there have been some very articulate advocates for the role of young carers. A former member of the committee, Lisa Nandy, I think has done a fantastic job. I haven't always agreed with everything that she said in raising those concerns. Those concerns have been reflected in debates in the Commons and the Lords and have resulted in some amendments to the Children and Families Bill as well. But you are right. It is often the case that there are some young people who have caring responsibilities, and they often don't want to reveal too much about what's happening. If you're
But they
if you're-
still require support.
they absolutely require support. But if your parent is, for the sake of argument, alcoholic or in the grip of an addiction or substance abuse and all the rest of it, it can be very difficult for the adult to recognise the problem, very difficult for a young person to compel them to seek the help that they need. But that young person may well have responsibilities not just to pick up the pieces in the adult's life, but to look after other youngsters in that home as well. And it's a really difficult situation if you've got someone who is in that position, and who are they going to share their troubles with? And I think part of course, what we would expect is that other responsible adults in their lives, not least those in school, would be able to find time to talk to young people so that they can help them through a situation which places them in a near impossible set of dilemmas.
Once, of course, they're identified.
Alex, I'm going to move on. Ian.
You had an E from carers to careers. You were singing Billy Joel before, or quoting Billy Joel, and so you took the good times. Now take the bad times.
Yes.
Ofsted has found that the new arrangements for providing careers guidance to young people are not working well in 3/4 of schools. Do you agree with the Skills Commission that provision of careers advice is now in crisis? And I use that advisedly. I did work quite extensively in the career service before Connections was invented, and certainly we're a long way from where we were before Connections was invented in regards to independent careers advice and guidance.
I think there are two things I'd say. I can't think of any time in the history of this country when we got advice and guidance to young people right. And no one has yet shown me an alternative international model where they get all of these things right. First point. Second point, the nature of the labour market that young people are entering has changed dramatically from when we were both young people. When for a majority, certainly of young men, and to a lesser extent young women, career choices were often dictated by geography and the pattern of industry at the time. So, for a lot of people when I was growing up, or more to the point when my father was growing up in Aberdeen, then there would be a number of obvious routes for people who did not secure academic qualifications and were not going on to higher education. The situation has become much more fragmented and difficult now. That requires a more sophisticated response, and that's something that we're grappling with at the moment. You're absolutely right that there are some schools, not enough, that get it right, but I think it's important that we don't beat up on schools in this regard, because no one beforehand has got the system of advice for young people perfect.
The Child Poverty and Social Mobility Commission have used the term "the chickens are coming home to roost" with regards to funding and handing the responsibility to schools. Do you think it's time, though, that we really do need to have some sort of national task force to re-evaluate not what needs to be done in terms of careers advice and guidance in schools? Quite often now, youngsters are having to make decisions about which academic route or which vocational route they're going to go down to before the age of 14. They're looking at options post-14, which go on into GCSEs or GMBQs or whatever, whichever model it is. Given that, don't we need to be doing much more about helping youngsters with independent, impartial advice and guidance at a much younger age?
I think there are two things I'd say. The first thing is about the options that students take, whether they're thinking at the age of 14 or 16 about which set of qualifications they should pursue. The evidence there very strongly is that premature specialisation reduces the number of options that people have later in life. And my view is that the more options that people can have for longer, the better. And I think that some of the changes that we have made to accountability, from the English Baccalaureate through to the Progress 8 measure, are encouraging people to take the sorts of courses that keep their options open. It is also the case that some of the changes that we've made following Alison Wolf's report to vocational qualifications as well mean that there are fewer vocational qualifications or so-called vocational qualifications around that people are tempted to take that then limit their chance to progress. I think one critical thing alongside that, though, is I do think that people need to develop, teachers, parents, young people, a clearer sense of what the world of work offers and demands. And I think that is best communicated by improving links between business or other employers and schools. Because I think that nothing is more inspiring or helpful than hearing from individuals in a particular area about the opportunities that they have to offer. And nothing is more likely, for example, to encourage someone to pursue science than knowing that the range of career options available to you is infinitely greater if you're doing physical sciences and mathematics than if you've chosen prematurely to specialise in other areas.
But there's a problem in delivering that on the ground,
yes.
given the nature of the local business economy. I mean, in places like the North East, for instance, you know, the number of large companies which are headquartered there are few and far between, and the economy is much more exemplified by SMEs. And it's a question of how do you get those SMEs the capacity to deliver this advice and guidance, this two-way communication with schools and school pupils, because, you know, they just don't actually have the physical capacity to do it themselves. And that's difficult because you haven't got the large corporations with large headquarters or large numbers of staff in a particular location.
There are different labour market realities in different parts of the country, but it's also the case, I think, that to be fair to the North East, there are a number of very impressive medium and large-sized manufacturing concerns, and I think that, well, for example, Nissan in Sunderland is an exemplary company in many ways. And
but Nissan can't do it.
It can't do it all. No. Can't do it all. But it's also the case that Newcastle University is one of the best in the country in everything, and you know, it's a world leader in naval architecture and in life sciences. And I think that there's a lot that can be done, particularly given that Newcastle University has been very good at developing business links, and so is Durham actually.
In Northumbria, by the way. So is Northumbria.
Indeed.
Yeah.
In getting some of the businesses which have already taken a particular interest in education close to schools. But I think that it's but just because it's not easy doesn't mean that we shouldn't make that our focus, because I infer from what you've said that you agree, irrespective of what other mistakes that we may have made, that it is right to concentrate on getting inspirational people from the world of employment in front of young people to explain to them how they can fulfil their ideals.
I couldn't agree more with that, but the trouble is they're not thick and fast on the ground, I'm afraid, necessarily. And we've actually had a situation whereby schools have had the responsibility of delivering careers guidance for 15 months or so, and I'm afraid to say, I think the general view out there is it is a bit of a mess. So when can the committee expect to see significant improvement in the quality of careers guidance being offered in schools?
Well, I think it is improving. I think it's improving for three reasons. One, because there's been a degree of political focus on this, not least from the committee, from the chairman and others. Two, because there's been a degree of leadership on this from Ofsted itself, Sir Michael's report, and the fact that the quality of careers guidance will form part of the overall inspection, I think, is going to drive things in the right way. And I think thirdly, the fact that the Minister with particular responsibility in this area, Matt Hancock, has both produced an action plan, which I found compelling and persuasive, and also some statutory guidance, which I had the opportunity to read last night, which will be coming out very shortly. I think that statutory guidance will bring a degree of clarity and help, which will make things improve. Now, of course,
make things improve. You
help things improve.
You think things are improving.
I think things are improving,
I would put it to you,
and they will improve even
no
more.
evidence. No evidence. National Careers Council, from Ofsted, from our study, no evidence yet that,
Well, let's
that
see.
things have improved? Have you got any evidence? You've told the committee that things are improving. Have you any evidence base for that assertion?
I believe that things will improve as a result of the changes
which
that
is
we have made.
Yes.
Of course, but then this is Christmas. It is a season where naturally all of us are enjoined to place our faith in small beginnings, and then great things flow from that.
I think I got something more than goodwill.
Bill was ready to come in and I'm going to bring David.
No, but I talked about the three wise men who are playing a role in this. The Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar of careers are, of course, Graham Stewart, Michael Wilshaw, and Matt Hancock.
You did introduce a Christmas theme at the beginning.
No, it's, we welcome that, Bill.
I think that one of the themes of some of the tweets was that you tend to put your education policy based on faith and on what you believe in rather than on evidence. But anyway, that wasn't the question I was going to ask. I was just going to say, not just to get on the record, not just at Christmas. This point about teachers and guidance to children and being ready for the world of work. And it's not just the North East, by the way, where small business is crucial. Small businesses are increasingly the place where young people will have their first experience of work. So I think this is an incredibly important point. But you seem to be suggesting there's a need for training for teachers when it comes to understanding what's needed in the world of work. Is that something you're proposing? Is that something you would suggest would be part of both initial teacher training and continuing professional development?
Let me take it one step back, and partly in response to the Chairman's question as well. Let's not imagine that prior to the transfer of careers responsibilities to schools, that the situation was brilliant. It's not the case that there was a Ming vase of careers guidance that has been smashed by a thoughtless government. It's perfectly clear. Ian quoted from the Social Mobility Report, the author of which is Alan Milburn, great man. Alan was the person who pointed out that Connections was appalling in the first place. So we inherited a poor situation, and we are improving it. On your specific point,
We will improve.
I believe we are.
Because you haven't been able to give any evidence that you have. I would say you've taken a...
But you haven't given me any
You've
evidence
taken
that we
an
haven't.
appalling situation, made it worse,
No.
but you hope it's going to get better.
No, I would contest that we've made it worse. I think that we've made it better. But there's
Can you give us any evidence? Has the Ofsted survey, is there any evidence at all, National Careers Council, have you any evidence to suggest that you've done anything other than made a bad situation worse so far?
There's no evidence that we've made a bad situation worse, because there's no evidence that the situation is worse than it was beforehand. No, there's not. The point is that there are a group of self-interested people.
You need to read our report, Secretary
I did.
State.
There are a group of self-interested people.
Oh, yes, it is.
No. Critical question.
Right.
Critical question.
No, we asked
What was better beforehand? No one's proven it. It's not there in the report. It is the case that the situation is improving. It is the case that, as I mentioned earlier, people are making better decisions about the qualifications that they should pursue. And if people think that we should reconstruct Connections,
Nobody
then,
says that.
well, in that case, the situation is clearly better, because we wouldn't want to go back to the status quo ante. If you don't want to go back to the situation beforehand, then it clearly was a worse situation, so it's clearly better now. That's not faith, that's
We will
logic.
not examine the logic. David has been waiting. I'm going to bring David in.
Yes. On Bill's broader point, no, not part of initial teacher training, but I do believe that it is an important part of how schools are run, and therefore professional development. That links should be forward with local business, yes.
I just feel it's a staggering level of complacency. We have got evidence from a variety of sources, including the Skills Commission, which refers to the situation being in crisis. It is getting
What's the evidence that it was worse? What is the evidence that the situation is worse now than before? You might regard the situation as bad,
So the
but what is the evidence?
from the Secretary of State is that, well, it never was really very good, and at least it's not got worse. Well, in
No, the
fact,
response from the Secretary of State is, I take this incredibly seriously. I believe in deploying intellectual rigour to analyse the problem, that there's a lot of garbage talked about careers from some self-interested sources, but there is now clarity and responsibility, and so not for the first time. We inherited a situation that was totally inadequate, and we are making improvements.
So is the Select Committee's own report part of that garbage?
No, but there are some people who have populated the debate who I think are not deploying the degree of rigour required, but who are self-interested.
Who are we talking about? I haven't the faintest idea who you're talking about, honestly.
Well,
Come on, name names.
Well, Secretary of State.
No, but, Ian, but,
Yes.
but just, you've said that, I mean, the debate is being clouded by self-interested people, named, unnamed, and I don't understand, I don't know who these people are.
I think I've probably said enough.
Well, Secretary of State, I'll take you back a little while, because what we've actually done is we've actually got rid of a whole range of organisations which were providing from an external source to schools independent advice and guidance to young people. Now, I agree with you about Connections. Connections came from a report by the social exclusion unit called Bridging the Gap. And then Connections was invented, but it was invented using the career service budget plus about 10%. And it was meant to provide a comprehensive service for young people. Now, obviously, with using the career service budget plus 10%, you could never hope to do that. So I'm going to criticise the last government for not doing that properly, making a mess out of it. But there was still independent advice and guidance for young people. Now, Malcolm Wicks, the late Malcolm Wicks, described much of what was happening in schools in terms of advice and guidance before career services and Connections were doing it much better as akin to pensions mis-selling. And that was because of bums on seats funding regimes and schools and institutions wanting youngsters to retain the places with the bums on seat funding regime. The responsibility now lies with schools, right? Do we not actually have a real danger that the independence and impartiality of careers advice has gone out the window because schools are passing the advice and guidance to young people themselves and quite often hoping to retain those youngsters in their own institution?
Malcolm X makes a fair point. I haven't seen. I know that there are one or two cases where that occurs. I know that there have been individual schools that have not advertised to their students the full range of post-16 options with the vigour that both of us, all of us, would want. True. However, I think that the way in which schools are being held to account for the decisions that they make more energetically by this department means that will change and is changing. Destination measures, as the chairman of the committee has pointed out, will become an increasingly important way in which the public and the government judge schools. And if a school takes the short-sighted view that someone should stay on in the sixth form to be one of those bums on that seat, then and the courses that they're doing aren't in their interests, that will show up in the fact that that person will not go on to the sort of destination that you would want. However, the other thing that I would say is that while there's a lively argument about the extent to which it's right for any school to have a sixth form and whether or not they should expand and so on, it's another area I know that the chairman's very interested in, I do think that there's nothing wrong with the belief that we should encourage more children to pursue an academic course beyond the age of 16.
But your department rejected this committee's recommendation that schools should publish an annual careers plan. And now, how are we going to see the accountability? How are we going to see the transparency in what they're delivering if they're actually not held to account about it properly on an annual basis?
I think that writing an annual plan or having a policy is, about my view, bureaucracy. The critical thing is, are you providing are you being held account for the outcomes rather than for the beauty and elegance of the policy that you write or construct? And I think that the fact that schools are going to be inspected for the quality of the careers guidance that they provide will concentrate their minds. I can understand why asking someone to write a policy is a tool to concentrate their minds. I think knowing that you're going to be inspected on it is more likely to concentrate your mind. I appreciate entirely that the intention behind what the committee proposed was to force that greater concentration of minds, but I think that it's happening anyway.
It's straightforward. I mean, it is an ask-go question. Ofsted has noted that schools, is repeating a bit of what Ian's already said, but I think I don't think I'd be interested to hear a further answer from you. Ofsted has noted that schools with sixth forms rarely promote vocational routes and apprenticeships in an effective way. Is there a conflict of interest in a school? It's the same question. Is there a conflict of interest in a school being expected to provide independent careers advice if it also needs to fill its own sixth form? How can this be addressed? Now, your answer was, well, if they go on to sixth form, then somehow it will show up that
in destination measures.
In destinations. Well, the truth is there are different options. which should be information about which should be provided to young people to make the best choice for them. Now, it is not true that everybody who goes to the sixth form will necessarily fail. It's not necessarily going to be a disaster for them. It's simply that because you've given the duty to schools, you don't insist that they have a career plan. You have nobody externally properly verifying that they're doing it in an open and impartial way, that they will get narrow information, for which doesn't necessarily mean it's all a disaster for them, but it means that children are channeled down certain routes to suit the institutional interest rather than the child's interest. In fact, the accountability regime does not counter the institutional interest to provide the impartial advice which we set down as statute. But we know from Ofsted is not happening on the ground. That's the central issue.
I think of all the tragic things happening in our education system at the moment, the fact that there are too many people doing A-levels is not one of them.
If, of course, I mean, you touched on it just now because it is a concern of mine and of the committees. If you are seeing people being kept on in small sixth forms, which you'll know, which are the least effective 16 to 18 providers? Small sixth forms. They're the least effective. Well, we've got, and you say you've got institutions struggling to fill their places, using their position as the sole arbiter of information, advice and guidance to direct people to stay on and keep their sixth form going. Now, you tell me, is that potentially a disaster? I would say yes, it is, because if they're not told about the other options, including sixth form colleges, including other providers, then in fact it is absolutely cheating the child of the best possible outcomes. It goes against the central tenets of your time in office, which is to raise standards for all.
Everything you describe, in a perfect world, that's a concern. It's not the biggest concern in education. Let's get real. I mean, the biggest problem is attainment at the level of 16. The biggest inhibitor on people's subsequent choices are not a conspiracy of head teachers determined to keep children imprisoned in sixth forms when they could be doing something else. The biggest problem is the quality of education that children have up until that point. If they've got the right qualifications at the age of 16, those choices are available to them. And the idea that children are not aware of apprenticeships when there is a huge excess of demand over supply for apprenticeship places is a misnomer. And let me take on another step back as well. Most of the people who are most aerated about this are careers advisors or people in the careers lobby and all the rest of it. Well, for the most part, in the past, let's look at the record of youth unemployment. Have they been hugely successful? No. The most important thing to do is to get business involved to make sure that people take the right decisions, which our accountability mechanisms are ensuring that they do. And I think that I think that the failure of this country in the past to ensure that young people are provided with a sufficiently wide range of opportunities comes down to failed to make sure that they are literate, numerate and confident in subjects like science, not that we've had an insufficient number of well-paid careers advisors.
Sorry, Chairman, I have to say, Secretary of State, I treat with incredulity the fact that over 20% youth unemployment in the northeast of England is down to careers advisors.
I treat with incredulity the idea that recruiting more and paying them more is going to deal with the youth unemployment problem in the north of England or anywhere else.
The point I would go back to is I think you're absolutely right to say one of the central challenges, increasing the rigour of the system, ensuring that there is a sufficient nudge towards academic pursuits for all, raising standards, entirely applaud that, and in changing the accountability system so it better aligns with the needs of all children, not just those at borderline, all of which this committee, cross-party, would support. But you've said a big challenge, and the Chief Inspector of Schools said to me last week that the big challenge now is to engage employers in our education system, because we have this very expensive educational chute, which is making so many children miss the employment bucket below. And that's not because there aren't jobs there, it's not because there's not possibility, it's because the education system is failing to provide. That's why we have this peculiar situation of a massive skills shortage at the same time that we have massive numbers of people who can't have work.
Correct.
But so we come back. So the careers advice and guidance, making the right choices, understanding how your learning can help you fulfill your hopes and dreams is, I would suggest, quite central to improving outcomes for young people today.
Yes.
You said you want to engage with employers, and yet the point about our careers report and the rest is that we haven't got an accountability regime or a structure that incentivises schools to do that. And destinations data may help in that regard, but at the moment, many employers bounce off the school system, which are obsessed by fulfilling the things which you said are central. Raising academic, in other words, getting at the moment, A to C's, GCSE, and they're therefore not that bothered about engaging with employers, and we have ample evidence that people, that employers are not being engaged in schools as they should be.
I think it's certainly the case that we should do more to engage employers with schools and vice versa. What I emphatically do not believe is that we need a cadre of careers advisors to operate in between those two.
But what we do know is, do you not think that it's better to have careers advice and guidance provided by a professional in careers advice and guidance, rather than a teacher who may have limited experience or understanding of local
I think
and
it's
national
better to
labour
get
markets?
business and indeed other employers in front of young people to inspire them.
So the old talk from a local businessman replaces face-to-face professional advice and guidance.
Well, I am sceptical about the capacity of careers advisors, given the record that we've seen in the past, to have all the knowledge required. What do we expect of them? Do we expect them to have perfect knowledge of the local labour market? Do we expect them to have an understanding of the psychology and motivation of the individual student? Do we expect them to be able to detect employment trends 5, 10 or 15 years out in order to offer that advice? If we do, then we're expecting them to be supermen and superwomen. I think that the specific question of how we ensure that young people are better equipped for the future has been, to my mind, clouded by the fact that you have a careers lobby that has failed in the past, has no effective answer for the future, wants to perpetuate its role, when in fact what we should be concentrating on is improving academic attainment and getting business people who can inspire in front of schools. Now, that's a clear vision. It is one that is being energetically pursued by Matthew Hancock and by the department, and no one has put forward either a working example from the past or from another country that we should adopt. If anyone can, I'd love to see it.
Thank you, Secretary of State. We'll move on. Neil.
Thank you very much. Good morning and happy Christmas.
Hi, Neil. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. Your statement today on funding allocations is essentially intends to deal with increasing spaces for pupils, both primary and secondary. So that's welcome. Do you think that it's going to be sufficient, given the projections that it's based on?
Yes.
Thank you. That's straight to the point. Because, of course, we were looking at this issue with your colleague, the Minister of State for Schools, and he was predicting the certain needs. This supersedes that, so presumably you've recalibrated those projections and recognised that more resources need to be.
Well, at the time that David was talking to the committee, we were in the middle of working out what additional funding, how we would distribute the additional funding. We knew that we had additional funding to support additional school places and, of course, to deal with maintenance and other challenges as well. As I think David explained brilliantly, there are a significant number of changes that have been made even since the coalition government was formed in how we gather data and give money to the front line. We know that, crudely, as David again explained, in Dorset you can say that overall net basic need is 0, but that means that sometimes in Poole and Swanage there might be an acute need, but in Sherborne and elsewhere there are a growing number of surplus places. And it's all very well saying that Dorset overall has no additional basic need, but it feels very different if you're in Swanage and you can't get your child a place because people are counting surplus places an hour and a half away. So we've gone below the local authority level with the support of local authorities and the Local Government Association in order to look at the real picture of pressure, and we've tried to ensure that funding better reflects that.
To what extent will the new academies help with the provision of new places as a proportion of your predictions?
Well, one of the things that we did in the previous round is that we had a targeted basic need programme, and the idea there was to invite local authorities to go out of their way to try to find partners, academies or free school providers, who could augment the provision of places locally. And part of that was because when you're spending an enormous amount of money, quite rightly, in order to address the need for additional school places, you don't just want to produce more school places, you want more good quality school places. And one of the things more broadly, and good people can disagree about this, about the school reform programme that we've put forward, is that a greater diversity of providers and managers of schools is more likely to drive up quality as well as providing new places.
In terms of local authorities, if a local authority has a really rather large proportion of autonomous schools, how is it going to be placed to effectively manage the question of supply of places?
Well, it's the case that autonomous schools are incentivised, of course, like all schools are, to accept additional pupils. It is the case also that there's been no evidence so far, and I think David mentioned this when he talked to the committee, that any autonomous school has stood in the way of providing the additional places that an area might need. More than that, if a local authority wants to improve provision, it can do so by holding a competition in order to create a new school or schools in that area. So it has the power to promote additional provision. The other thing that I would say as well is that even though the number of academies is growing fast, as we know, the pupil place challenge is primarily in primaries, and something like around 90% of primary schools are, of course, maintained or voluntary aided or voluntary controlled schools, i.e. not academies.
Go back. Did you say that there wasn't evidence that academies had been using their autonomy to resist expansion?
My reading of the evidence that David gave when you questioned him was that it had not been the case that anyone had said that there was a specific problem because an academy had resisted the invitation to expand, which had created a basic need problem. But if there is a situation like that, then of course I'd love to know, and it's entirely possible that such a situation may have occurred.
It's just because the DFEs did a piece of research, your department, and said in areas where the demand for places is rising sharply, particularly at primary level, there is some evidence that academies are using their freedom to choose not to expand, or community schools are looking to academy status as a means of avoiding expansion in the future. That's your own department's research.
Yes.
A Twitter inquiry has actually probed that point by wondering if good schools, obviously good academies, should be actually almost forced to expand to meet needs of pupils. What would you say to that?
I'd be wary about additional compulsion, because my sense is that the money is there and the incentives are there. I take the point that the chairman makes about that research, but one of the things that I'd want to hear specifically from local authorities are where those pinch points are, because one of the concerns that I would have is that the reporting of some of those issues may reflect a failure properly to secure the leadership required on either side. In other words, I prefer to deal with each specific case rather than a general report or potential future hypotheses.
Where do you think the equilibrium is between the issue of spaces and the issue of competition to improve standards? Because this is really at the heart of the free schools debate. Because if you've got an area with surplus spaces, for example, but you've got inadequate schools, and there's a demand for a free school, what kind of basis of a decision would you sort of make, given those situations?
I think each case has to be judged on its merits. So if you've got a potentially outstanding or a very innovative and exciting proposal, then we want to back that. But it's also the case that we need to make sure that a sufficient amount of money is there to meet the need for additional school places in that local authority and nationally. We've gone to great trouble to work out what's required with the help of local authorities overall, and then there is additional money, and that additional capital can be devoted to anything from new schools that can be innovative and help raise quality, the necessary maintenance that's required across the school estate, and also, of course, other things which the department has to fund, from improving the quality of residential care to providing the investment that people might need in order to prepare for the, I think, wholly welcome extension of free school meals to infant children.
Do you have a sort of a proportion in mind for a local authority area where a certain number of sort of surplus places could be tolerated in order to promote competition?
No, I mean, I know that at different times figures like 3 and 5% have been used as the ideal for surplus places, but I think it's important to look at each locality and to weigh both the granular picture in that area of demand and surplus places, but also to look at the quality of educational provision overall in that area as well.
Thank you. Alex.
On the question of free schools, the National Audit Office tells us that ministers decide which applications to approve to pre-opening based on officials' recommendations. On how many occasions have ministers overruled the recommendations of the officials?
Several. I'll write back to the committee and let you know, if you'd like, the precise number. I think it's only right to say that officials put forward recommendations, ministers interrogate them. Sometimes it will be the case that officials will say that a particular project is viable or attractive, and ministers will say, actually, do you know what? I don't think that we should proceed with it, and sometimes vice versa.
The NEO also reported that 17% of lower scoring applications were approved. Did that include the likes of Al Medina, Discovery New School and King's Science Academy?
I have to stress that it's important that the confidentiality of advice that's given by officials to ministers is respected. But within those constraints, I think it's only appropriate, given the legitimate public interest in those 3 schools, that I write back to you with more details about the application procedure in each of those cases.
So you will actually confirm whether or not your officials recommended them for approval or not?
I will write back to you with more detail. And of course, if you feel that, following on from my having written back to you, that there are further questions you'd like to address to me, then of course I will answer them. But one of the things I'm anxious to do, Alex, is that I am a very strong believer in the fact that officials need to be able to offer advice frankly and candidly, and that safe space needs to be protected. But, so in ordinary circumstances, I would say, no, I'm not going to reveal anything, but I do believe, for obvious reasons, that there is a very legitimate public interest in those cases, so I will write back and of course, give my...
You will confirm whether or not your officials recommended them for approval or not?
I will write back. I'm not going to tell you now exactly what I must...
That's clear. Thank you. Thank you. David.
Put in.
You mentioned the King's Science Academy.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you whilst on that subject?
Yeah.
Do you think when there's been an internal audit report, an EFA report, an internal audit investigation team report, all showing widespread financial mismanagement, irregularities and fraud, do you think it's right that the principle of that college should actually still be in place?
Well, I think that there are specific concerns, well, you know, David, have been raised. And I think it would be wrong for me to talk about individuals while it's still the case that there are 1 or 2 matters that require to be resolved.
These reports are...
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. No,
very late.
Let's be clear. There are some there are things that went wrong. B, there are people who, at the very least, made mistakes. C, we sought to inform appropriate authorities about the investigation.
Should the head principal not be suspended while these investigations, including police investigations, are carried out? That would happen in any other maintained school.
I'm not going to be drawn on individuals at this point.
That's
I think that we should, all of us, never forget that no matter what the status of these schools, they are funded by the taxpayer, they're
Absolutely.
funded by the public purse.
Yes.
And therefore, you know, the openness and transparency, I think, is required just by that very fact alone. I'm just making that observation.
I absolutely agree, and it is the case that there is a greater degree of openness and transparency about the management of free schools and academies than maintained schools. We had the opportunity to discuss this on the floor of the House in an Opposition Day debate, but let me state again that there are greater responsibilities on the members of academy trusts, including free schools, in terms of financial reporting than there are for local authority schools. The National Audit Office has conducted, I think, a very good report into the whole process of approving free schools, with some interesting recommendations, but also some proper praise for the department and its officials. The National Audit Office itself also said that the process of local authority oversight of financial management within maintained schools was not good enough. And it is the case, David is quite right, and you are quite right to say that when public money is involved, we've got to be careful about every penny, and we've got to hold people in public service to the highest standards. But it is also the case that there have been, in different types of schools at different times, individuals who have fallen short. So I think it's not about the type of school, it is about the need to remain vigilant, whoever is scrutinising.
Thank you very much. Bill.
How much does each place in a free school cost the taxpayer? #AskGove.
It varies. I can provide you with the average, but the one thing I can tell you, as the National Audit Office reported, is that free school places have been provided at a significantly lower cost than school places were provided by the last Labour government.
Okay, thank you, Ian.
So are you going to? Sorry, we can get an answer to that. Are you right to us with that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I can give you the capital costs. The thing about the revenue costs is that they're exactly the same as for, they're the average of the revenue costs for schools in that area. But capital is obviously the area of greater contention. The most important single fact is cheaper than under the last Labour government, but of course variation in costs, because there are some free schools that have been more expensive than others. But overall, I think the National Audit Office pointed out that the department had been creative and imaginative in finding new sites for new schools.
How many applications to establish free schools have been rejected, Secretary of State?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. You couldn't actually give us the figures, could you?
I will give you the exact figures.
Thank you very much. Now, Bill alluded to this earlier on, but I'd just like to make sure for the record, because in 2012 you said that your foot was hovering over the pedal on the expansion of grammar schools. Does last week's decision to reject Kent's proposal to open a new one mean that you now have cold feet rather than hovering?
No, I'm very happy. Motoring metaphors are always dangerous for politicians, and me in particular. But what I would say is that should a future application come forward that is consistent with the law, then of course I would approve it for a grammar school as I would for any other school that is good and that wishes to expand.
Okay. In the description of the role of the new regional schools commissioners, one of the commissioners' responsibilities is to deauthorise sponsors where necessary. Would a reluctance to expand to serve an increasing population be grounds for deauthorisation of a sponsor? And what other grounds might there be?
I don't think in and of itself, though it might well be considered a relevant consideration. I think deauthorisation would follow if a sponsor had, for the sake of argument, not lived up to the expectations that we had, or the record that it had displayed of strong school leadership.
Given that the new schools commissioners are going to have some sort of regional remit, is there any conflict between government departments about the concept of regions? I know the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government hates the concept of regions, but you're going to have a regional planning system through these commissioners.
Well, it's already the case that Ofsted have, I think, rightly recognised that it helps to have someone operating on a regional basis. I think I hesitate to what's the word? Speak for Eric when Eric can brilliantly speak for himself. I think Eric's point would be that trying to say that everything should fit within 9 regions and that you should have all sorts of responsibilities within that is wrong. But I think Eric would absolutely say that sometimes you need to operate above the level of individual local authorities. And I know that Eric has encouraged, including in the North East, a number of local authorities to share services. And of course, LEPS, which Eric has played a part in fact, he's been the principal champion of, operate on a above local authority level. And it's...
And what a success they've been.
Well, in my own experience, working with my local LEP has been great, but obviously I look forward to finding out more about LEPs in the North East.
School Commissioner,
I was just going to come on. I do beg your pardon. I understand as far as the north of England is concerned, there is speculation that you would only have one school commissioner running across the 3 northern regions, Yorkshire and Humberside, the northwest and the northeast.
The plan was to have a regional schools commissioner covering the northeast and also the northern half, as it were, of the northwest.
Right.
In essence, Cumbria.
Right.
The reason for that...
So you're reintroducing the old standard planning region.
I didn't know it was the old standard planning region. Someone, a WAG, pointed out that in fact that we were having more school commissioners operating on a regional level, one more than we had in the Heptarchy. Someone else pointed out that what I was recreating was the old kingdom of Northumbria. It's nothing to do with any of that. The real reason is, and it goes back to the earlier point, we want to make sure that the regions have a sufficient number of strong NLEs in each area. And it's no reflection on the quality of the North East, it's just a reflection on the fact that it's in population terms, the smallest of the existing 9 regions, that it helps to bring Cumbria in, and indeed there are, as you know well, certain common areas of interest across Cumbria and Northumberland.
So King Oswald has a champion in you, yeah, there would be. Right. What duties will the commissioners have with regard to the coordination and creation of new school places, mindful of the necessity for sensible targeting?
If that's not their role. One thing I should say about the people who I hope will apply for these roles is that...
They'll be paid the same as the Prime Minister, I believe, is that right? All of them?
Well, obviously we'll wait to see who the candidates are, but we want to attract really good people. They will be civil servants. They will be operating under the Schools Commissioner himself, Frank Green, brilliant head teacher, and they will also be working with local head teachers, head teacher boards of outstanding heads, and it will be their role to help the Schools Commissioner in his role to try to find new sponsors, to try to broker the right relationship between underperforming schools and the sponsors who can help them to improve. But pupil place planning remains a local authority responsibility.
Are these, how significant are the schools commissioners in developing and improving education?
Quite.
So, if they're quite important to the future of education, why was this policy announced through an advertisement in the Times Educational Supplement rather than in a statement to the House? Any notification of this committee or any of the normal democratic scrutiny you might expect of something that has quite a bit of significance?
I suppose one of the things about quite is that it's one of the words in the English language that can be a qualifier or an intensifier. All I would say, quite. Quite. All I would say is that it's an internal reorganisation of the Office of the Schools Commissioner. I don't think it was the case that when the Office of the Schools Commissioner was created, there was a parliamentary statement. I don't think it was the case when Bruce Lidington was replaced in that role. In fact, it was vacant actually for quite some time under Ed Balls. That was the subject of a parliamentary statement. I don't think when Frank Green was appointed that it was the subject of a parliamentary statement. I don't think that some of the... one of the most significant things I suspect that's happened in my time is Education Secretary has been the fact that within the department we moved to having a DG for educational standards, one for infrastructure and finance, and one for children's services. It matters quite a lot in the day-to-day running of the department, but it wasn't subject to a parliamentary statement. It's not a significant change of policy. It is an administrative reorganisation, much in the same way as the decision of Ofsted to change its management was, in order to get a different approach towards local intelligence. So, in the greater scheme of things, I wouldn't want to overstate its importance.
Well, given the focus on the absence of the middle tier, somebody to sit between a minister's desk and the running of a small 400 pupil school like, I don't know, Al Medina, or indeed the closure of the Discovery school, surely this is a significant development, because somebody locally based, working with head teachers with an understanding of what's going on closer to the ground, will be taking these decisions in future. Will they be taking these decisions in future on things like the closure of
the decisions will still be taken by the Secretary of State, but what it means is that you are going to have someone who will be the schools commissioner, like other civil servants, provides advice. We discussed the extent to which ministers can reject or accept the advice of officials. So someone working for the Office of the Schools Commissioner in the region will have local intelligence and the support of local head teachers. They'll make a recommendation. If the Secretary of State, me, a successor, disagrees, then they'll be perfectly at liberty to say thank you for your advice. You make a strong case, but for the following reasons, I say no. So, as Enoch Powell once said, power devolved is power retained.
Pat.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Can I talk to you about good old-fashioned school planning, places planning? And if you'll indulge me, I want to talk through a couple of statistics.
Yes.
We know that we need a 27% increase in primary need by 2016 on top of an existing primary shortage.
Yes.
That means that we need 500,000, 500,000 places between 2015 and 2021.
Yes.
In secondary, we are expecting a 3% fall in secondary places between 2012 and 2015, but numbers will increase slightly so that we will be at expected need in secondary at the same level as we had in 2012,
yes.
2018.
Yep.
So slight increase, but we're only going to get back to 2012 levels. And yet, the vast majority of free schools that have been approved have been secondary schools, and many of them have been approved in places where there is already up to 30% surplus in secondary places. And we know now that on 2012 figures, nearly a quarter of all free schools that opened at 60% capacity, and two comprehensives have only 40 pupils on their books. One 14 to 19 school has only 40 pupils, and another secondary school has recruited only 35 pupils. Now, when your schools minister came here to talk to us about this, I think I can recall saying to him, in terms of school planning and financial accountability, anyone looking at this from the outside would see this as a product of a deranged mind. How do you account for this gross waste of public money?
Can I ask, which is the 14 to 19 school?
I don't have that, but I'll write to you and
Please.
let you know.
Touché. I wouldn't say. I think that you did make that point very effectively to David, and I think David gave, if anything, an even more effective reply, which is that if you look overall at the amount of money that we've spent on giving local authorities cash in order to create pupil places, then £5 billion, 260,000 places already created, more spent on basic need than under the last government, twice as much, up to 3 times as much spent. So in that sense, the free school budget is dwarfed by the amount that's been spent and is going to be spent in the future on basic need.
In capital as well, though?
Oh, totally in capital, yes, absolutely. Dwarfed. I think it's also the case that if we look at the primary free schools that have opened, they're almost all in areas of severe or significant need. And if we look at the secondary schools, which you mentioned, by definition, since new secondary schools all new schools fill up generally 1 year at a time. Some of them fill up with year 7 and then year 12 because they recruit both at age 11 and 6th form. They're not going to be full from the beginning, by definition. Indeed, it would be derangement to imagine that you would want to fill them all at that time. And again, as David Laws pointed out, the majority of free schools that have been open for more than 1 year are now oversubscribed. Free schools that don't attract students, like any school that doesn't attract students, risks closure. And if one looks at the degree of innovation which we've seen on the ground in the overwhelming majority of free schools, I don't think anyone can say that they've been anything other than hugely successful additions to comprehensive state education. I think if you were to visit, you may already have had the chance to do so, the Greenwich Free School, or Reach Academy, or Arc Atwood, or Arc Conway, or the CFBT free school in Reading. I could carry on with the list. Many, many more than the 3 which have, for understandable reasons, attracted media attention because of their problems. Many, many more out of the 174 currently open are making a fantastic contribution. I think it would be an act of derangement to deny the improvement that they're bringing.
Can I ask you about the Durham Free School?
Yes, please.
In my area. And,
In
I'd be
concert?
interested- No, in Durham City.
Sorry, yes.
And I'll be interested in your views on that. That is, in September of this year, a school closed in the city for lack of numbers. There are, I think, 5 other secondary schools in the city, all with surplus places, all good or outstanding, and there are some incredibly outstanding schools in Durham City. A new free school opened in September in a city with good and outstanding schools where all of the existing schools have got surplus places in the same building in which a school closed for lack of numbers in September. Do you see that as a good value, a good use of taxpayers' money?
Yes, and I think in the future we'll be able to judge that school against the other schools in Durham City. I've had the opportunity to talk to head teachers from Durham, indeed on one occasion visiting your constituency. And I know that in Durham City itself, Durham Johnston School is widely recognised as one of the strongest in the country. But the proposal that was put forward had a great deal to recommend it. It had support from local employers as well. We'll see. On the basis of the case that was put, the ministers thought that it had the potential to be a very, very good school. I think we will have to wait and see just how good. But I think it's only fair to say that neither of us can pronounce with authority on whether or not that's a good use of money until we've seen how the school's performed over a couple of years.
Can I ask you about the wider issue of free schools? The Swedish Education Minister recently told Reuters, I think we had too much blind faith in the view that more private schools in the state system would generate greater educational quality. We were wrong. And I think we would all recognise that the free market experiment in Sweden has largely failed, and Swedish children who were once top of the international league tables have plummeted down the PISA scales. Secretary of State, do you ever wake up in the middle of the night sweating and think, my God, what if I've got this wrong?
No, I don't often wake up in the middle of the night sweating. I always ask myself if the policy that we're pursuing is right, and sometimes it needs to change. I'll come back to free schools in just a second, but one of the things that I would say is that I like to put forward a case as clear as possible, invite opposition or comments, and sometimes I've acknowledged that I've got it wrong, not least over GCSE reform, where this committee played a very important part, as did others, in persuading me to take a different course from the one that I'd set out. So I'm completely open to thinking we got that wrong. I think it's also the case that, as I've acknowledged and others have acknowledged, when you're setting up 174 new state schools, not all of them are going to be brilliant. And there are 3 at least where there have been significant challenges, and we had to take tough action with one of them to close it, which was a matter of regret for me, but we had to do it in the interest of the students. With respect to Sweden, the evidence is that in those municipalities where you have a higher proportion of free schools, standards are better, and that standards overall in free schools are better than in other schools. That's the academic evidence. The real problem, I think, in Sweden has been that they've lacked an effective inspectorate, such as we have with Ofsted, and they've only recently created one. And I think the other problem that Sweden has had is a lack of the high-stakes external testing that we have in this country. And it's often some of those things which are held up for excoriation by some as being punitive and old-fashioned, which are in fact some of the greatest drivers of school improvement and of social mobility. And looking at the overall PISA story, I think it's wrong to look at any one country and say, I wish we could transplant that here. You can't make Britain Sweden, you can't make it Finland, you can't make it Shanghai, and you should not want to. But if you look at all of the high-performing jurisdictions, there are certain common features. And the strongest three common features brought out by Andrew Schleicher are maximum amount of autonomy for principals, strong external accountability, and good stuff.
Like in Singapore. I mean, we visited Singapore. In Singapore, it was almost a kind of Soviet state. A head teacher has no choice of what school they work in, and they move every 3 years.
Well,
that's not autonomy.
Again, I would stress that it is wrong to say we would transplant every aspect of one country here. It is the case that there's quite a lot of strong central direction of heads, and indeed we're thinking, it goes back to the chairman's first question, we're thinking not about central direction in which we conscript heads, but we are thinking about how we can incentivize and encourage heads, as they do in Singapore and indeed in Shanghai, to go to the schools where they're most needed. I don't believe that one should be entirely laissez-faire about that, but I don't believe in the state direction of labour either. But to go to the broader substantial point behind it, individual principals in Singapore have a significant, once deployed, have a significant degree of autonomy. They also have very strong external accountability. And those two features together are the common features. Now,
Can I ask you very quickly about the Information Commissioner? Why are you refusing to publish, in line with the ruling of the Information Commissioner, free school applications, acceptance and rejection letters? What have you got to hide?
I have nothing to hide, but I do believe that it's important that we protect those people who put forward applications which may have been rejected, because we know that free school promoters and others have endured vilification and attacks. I don't think that people who made applications on the basis that those applications would be treated in confidence, and who may, if they've been unsuccessful, expose themselves to the risk of intimidation, should be exposed to that risk by my actions.
Okay.
Can I just very quickly ask the Secretary of State, you talked earlier about the need to conform to the law. Why does that not apply to you? The Information Commissioner said you should publish these things.
Well, we're appealing. It's a.
And if the tribunal says you must publish them, will you then publish them?
I will do everything possible to keep and to protect the confidentiality of those people. But when I hope that we will prevail. If at the end of this process then I have no option but to publish, then I will have no option but to publish.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you about you said about the necessary move to close the school, and I assume you were talking about Discovery New School. Do you think it was given enough time to improve?
Yes, but going back to Pat's point, these are never easy decisions, but I do think...
And should they really be made? I mean, Al Medina, with Lord Nash's letter with the 57 requirements specifying what should go on in the small school, from a desk in London to the decision to close this school far away from Whitehall. Does that not show a certain absurdity and the need to have somebody else closer to the ground to make these decisions?
Well, I think at the moment, even though it's been a success, it's also a small-scale programme. But you are right. I think in the future, one of the things that we should think about is how we develop an approach towards school entry and exit with multiple authorisers, as they have in other jurisdictions. But at the moment, I think while it's the case that people can always question some of the decisions that have been made, I don't think...
Is it not an irony? I mean, the point of the policy partly was to allow parents in the local community to challenge existing provision and have a new vision, and it's those very same parents who are very upset about their head teacher being given just 12 days to turn the school round and then seeing it shut by someone as far away as in Whitehall.
No, I sympathise with the parents. But I think it's also the case that politicians always say a balance needs to be struck. People sometimes shrug their shoulders and think that's an evasion of responsibility, but a balance does need to be struck. There is space for innovation and risk-taking in the programme. Some people would argue that that innovation or that space for innovation has been too broad. Others, and this is the implication of your question, would argue that perhaps it hasn't been broad enough.
I'm just trying to understand, I wonder why. I mean, because if you take the timing, and the head teacher had just been appointed, it'd actually been in special measures, I think, for 6 months, was I think, average. Typically, schools can be a year, 18 months,
Yes.
and all the rest of it. Why make this? I mean, it's a difficult decision, there's a balance to be made, but why, in this particular case, was the school shut down? Was it post Almadina? Was there a sort of defensiveness, desire to sort of be seen to be striking out?
No, right from the very beginning, we recognised that there would be some free schools that would not succeed. Obviously, we hoped that the number would be as small as possible, ideally 0, but we recognised that there was that risk. And we also recognised that we needed to act quickly in those circumstances. The difference, I think, between Almadina and the Discovery Free School is that even though Almadina itself did not respond sufficiently effectively with proposals to improve, we did identify in Barry Day and the Greenwood Dale School Trust a trusted partner who could take over that school and command the confidence of parents, and more particularly demonstrate that they had the potential to take that school over. That option was explored in the case of the Discovery New School, but there was no appropriate alternative.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on, and a bit less than half an hour left if we go to 11:45. Siobhan.
Do you think that you will ever see tax-funded schools run for profit?
No.
Thank you.
I'll stick to a couple of the questions as well to get through some of the ASCO questions. There's one here about the free school meals and calculation of the pupil premium. Can you tell me how that will work out?
Yes, as you know, there are some local authorities which already provide free school meals for all infant or primary children, and they've been able to identify those families which would have been eligible or are eligible if they were in a different area, and then make sure that their pupil premium allocations have been appropriately secured. But you raise a policy question that we're debating within the department at the moment, and that is the identification of children eligible for free school meals, or children who have ever been eligible for free school meals over a particular period, is only ever a proxy for poverty overall. And there was a debate before we chose free school meal eligibility about exactly how you would identify how the pupil premium is allocated. And I think that there has to be a debate, there is a debate now in the department about two things. One, should we revisit the mechanism for allocating the pupil premium? And two, should we think again about, in that context, the accountability measures in order to ensure that the most disadvantaged children are supported? So there is an open debate, but it's certainly the case that as existing local authorities have shown that you can provide universal free school meals and correctly identify families that would otherwise have been eligible for free school meals.
So the funding that is currently available through the pupil premium, whatever the outcome of that, will be retained and not diminished in any way.
Absolutely, and I would hope that over time that we can enhance the amount of money that is given to support deprivation. But it is certainly, as long as I have any influence over education spending, then we would not want to diminish the pupil premium one iota, nor would we want to take away from its central function, which is to support disadvantaged children.
And also another question, I've also been approached by Bradford College on this very point, which is the funding for the 18-year-old, which is a new development. And the question here through this tweet is, are the costs of educating an 18-year-old in 24 to 15 70% lower than for a 17-year-old?
Well, for those who don't know, I'm sure everyone in Bradford College will know, we had to make a decision to reduce the amount that we spend on for 18-year-olds from 4,000 to 3,300. most 18-year-olds are not educated in isolation from 16 and 17-year-olds. It is a way of reducing the budget overall for institutions that educate 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. And it is a painful cut forced on us by A, difficult economic circumstances, and B, the fact that there are some parts of the education budget that are protected and some parts that are not. I know...
Would you describe this decision as regrettable? I mean, I got a letter yesterday from Wilberforce College in Hull, served some of my constituents. As it happens, I think the average cut for sixth form college is about 1% and a bit. In their case, it's going to be 4%. Hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Because they have more 18-year-olds.
Because they have more 18-year-olds. They're typically dealing... We know Hull has had difficulties, and yet we've got these colleges doing their absolute best to turn around the lives of young people, keep them in education, and they feel as if this is a kick in the teeth, dealing with the very children most at risk of being NEET, and then you're pulling the money away, which seems like incoherence when you're also doing the pupil premium. They just feel...
I absolutely take the point. I think we conducted an impact assessment which we can share with the committee. In short, there are of all the ways in which we looked at to reduce expenditure in the 16 to 18 area, this is the one which we felt was the least worst. But I won't say that it's a good thing to reduce spending in this area. It's a difficult decision, and yes, I...
And can you say something particular about sixth form colleges? Because
yes.
I mean, historically they just seem consistently to the highest performing sector, and yet they feel as if there was no growth in their number. They seem very unheralded. It seems rather odd when so driven by raising standards not to seek to expand that area of the sector, which is the most efficient, cost effective, and excellent at raising standards and closing the gap between rich and poor.
It is, and I'd welcome. I enjoy engagement with the sixth form college sector. There are lots of my own constituents who benefit from superb sixth form colleges, not least in Farnborough. The question as to whether or not there aren't more, there is the opportunity, and there are new 16 to 18 institutions that are being created, whether or not one calls them sixth form colleges. For example, the London Academy of Excellence or the new Harris Westminster Sixth Form College. They certainly they walk, talk, and act like sixth form colleges. Whether or not they choose to call themselves that is a separate matter. So there is expansion in that area. But as you yourself have raised, there are some historical inequalities, not least the fact that sixth form colleges are treated unfairly with respect to VAT. I'd love to be able to do that, but money is tight.
Will you look at this? I mean,
we do. We looked at it before the autumn statement, and the case is clear and strong. But it's just, and people can quite properly say, "Oh, you should have spent money on that rather than this." I would defend the choices that we make, but I would also say, going back to the point that Ian and Pat referred to, if I can get more money from the Chancellor, and we can be certain that it will be spent effectively, and there's no doubt that sixth form colleges do, then I'd love to be able to address that anomaly. And very briefly...
The past of the past, I was just going to say, going forward, it just seems there's big opportunity. If you would personally take an interest in that and look at it, because successive, I mean, there has been no growth fundamentally in sixth form colleges for quite some time, yet they're the most effective sector, it appears. And it really does need political attention.
There are new post-16 institutions. There will be new post-16 institutions with a particular specialism in maths, so we're taking that forward. One other thing I would say, in the past I've had to disappoint this committee and the House by saying that we would not extend free school meals to people who weren't in school but in post-16. That's because we didn't have the cash. Thanks to the tenacity and skill with which the Minister of State argued his case to the Treasury, we now have. That's a tribute to your campaigning, Robert Halfon's campaigning, and David Law's technical mastery of his case. So hopefully we'll be able to address this in the future.
His bill was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the VAT sixth form college is about creating a level playing field. But
I quite agree.
Yeah, the question is going to come back to free school meals. We've taken evidence on more than one inquiry that free school meals isn't necessarily the best indicator. And I think you were acknowledging that.
Yes.
That there's a debate to be had. But will you look at whether parental attainment is a good way, or possibly a better way?
Prior attainment. Yes.
Yeah, because that again comes from international comparisons. Is it something you've
Yes, we are looking at. Yes, I mean, yes is the short answer.
Okay, good. And the linked question about how you're going to calculate the pupil premium once all infant children receive free school meals.
Well, David touched on that as well, and there are local authorities, Labour local authorities, that have found that there's no problem in having universal access to free school meals and correctly identifying those families who would otherwise have been eligible for free school meals in another local authority area and to whom the pupil premium can be attached.
Yeah. Okay.
Chris.
We're on the general sort of knowledge section now.
Sure.
The hashtag AskGove, and I'm going to come on to exams, curriculum and accountability. So all these questions have been asked on Twitter. When it comes to the GCSE reforms, how are you planning to tackle the demoralising effect that linear exams and no coursework will have on children who struggle?
I don't think it will have demoralising effect. I mean, I think that that's an ideological view which I don't share.
Okay. When it comes to the new GCSE specifications with the abolishing of tiering, one question that's been asked is, will this deny access to many students in special schools who used to achieve grades C to G? Have we written them off?
Absolutely not. The whole point about tackling tiering is to try to ensure that there is no, wherever possible, no cap on aspiration for students, whatever type of school they're in. But of course, like this committee, I'm guided by the evidence, and the evidence is that retaining tiering, not least in mathematics, is sensible.
Okay. With the new 2016 accountability measures, one question that's been asked is, could you confirm today which non-EBAC GCSEs will count as high value?
I can't, unfortunately, but I will. There's work going on with Ofqual in that area, but I think that the rumours of the demise of certain GCSEs are likely to prove to have been exaggerated.
Someone's asked, why can't we allow children to do fewer GCSEs but actually spend more time on those fewer GCSEs?
That's entirely open to a school. The choices that are in the best interests of the student are the choices that should guide the school.
And when it comes to school freedom around the curriculum, why don't we give the freedom from the national curriculum that's given to free schools and academies to good and outstanding local authority schools?
If they apply to become academies, then they can exercise that freedom.
Okay. Why, someone's asked, is there a national curriculum at all if only some schools need to follow it?
Yes. Well, one of the things about the national curriculum is that it was written taking account of the fact that there's greater autonomy. So, therefore, as Russell Hobby has pointed out, the deal with the profession would be a slightly greater degree of prescription over content in primary, in English and mathematics and science, in return for far greater flexibility in every other area. And so, not least over teaching methods and style. So, the national curriculum becomes more of a benchmark and a tool for parents and teachers to structure what they deliver, and it's less prescriptive overall than its predecessor document.
When it comes to the new documents, the national curriculum, what type of...
Hansard's sake, we'll wait till after the bell.
When it comes to the new national curriculum, what type of training will teachers receive in order to be able to implement the changes? Will there be any training at all for teachers?
Yes, we're going to be making, it's already the case that schools are gearing up, but we'll be making an announcement early in the new year about some additional support that we will be giving to all schools in order to make them ready for the implementation of the new national curriculum in September.
And when it comes to, there's a significant change with the computing curriculum.
Yes.
Who exactly is going to be training the staff, do you envisage, in order to be able to deliver that?
Well, it's already the case that the BCS, British Computing Society, and a number of other organisations have offered support, and I think the impression that I've had is that there's been general excitement on the part of most teachers of ICT at this change. It is also the case, of course, that there are teaching schools and members of teaching schools alliances which have particular expertise in this area. Should any school worry or have concerns, then there will be schools both geographically near or with which they have relationships, which will be able to help them.
I'm going to come on quickly to some individual subjects within the GCSE framework. This one's actually under #SaveGCSE Drama. Do you still... It might be. Do you still only value drama as an extracurricular subject? Because there's been concerns about where the new artistic and cultural elite of this country will come from. So there's asked.
I have never said that drama should be only extracurricular. From the more prominent role that Shakespeare plays in the English literature curriculum through to the Best 8 measure, which has explicit space for creative subjects, I have been very anxious to make sure that dance, drama, art and design and music are all there as options which are valued and supported.
Okay, another subject-specific concern that's been asked is, considering the economic shortage of engineers and employees for STEM-related careers, why is DT not an EBAC subject?
Because we've drawn the EBAC subjects from those subjects that have been identified by the Russell Group and others as facilitating subjects, which give students the maximum range of subsequent options. I think, slightly off the point, one of the areas of greatest contention has actually been the inclusion of economics from the EBAC, even more perhaps than religious studies. But the new Best 8 measure, I think, means that for people who want to do design and technology alongside these other subjects, then the room is there. I should stress, of course, that for people who aspire to a career in engineering, then the single most important subject is mathematics.
Following that, one thing you did add was computing.
Yes.
To the EBAC, and
yes.
Insofar as the EBAC is a closed vessel, if you stick something else in it, it displaces another thing. I vaguely remember from my physics. What did you?
No two objects can occupy the same space at the same time.
There's a fear in the science community that the addition of computing will lead to the welcome increase that we'd seen in triple science will be going to reverse. That it might take quite some time and a lag before that appears, and we could end up years down the road having returned more to double science rather than triple science. Do you think? Can you give any reassurance on that? And better wait till this finishes.
I think that's unlikely.
Will you? Would you say something? Is there a way that you could make it very clear to schools that triple science continues to be the best possible option and should be offered? Because otherwise, there's a danger that double science will, as I say, replace the triple science with a bit of computing.
Well, computing is hugely important. I'm delighted that we've overhauled ICT in the curriculum and introduced a computer science GCSE, but you have provided me with an opportunity to say absolutely physics, chemistry and biology should be studied as individual and discrete subjects. They are all important. More students should be studying science for longer, and there is a particular concern with the number of women who go on to study physics, particularly at A level. And I'm grateful to BIS and Number 10 for organising a roundtable yesterday to help address this subject. As a matter of social justice as well as economics, it's wrong that we do so badly in supporting young women to study the physical sciences.
The report says that 49% of state mixed schools are reinforcing gender stereotypes in terms of A-level subjects. And how will you stop this? It's
an Institute of Physics report, isn't it? Closing doors. The conversations that we had yesterday were designed to explore that. Specifically, we asked 2 schools that had been very successful in encouraging young women to study physics, what their experience was, and we also talked to a variety of organisations. We're reviewing now what we can do to tackle that problem.
Ian?
Given that there's clear evidence that that is actually happening in terms of the gender stereotyping within schools, that kind of takes us back to the careers advice and guidance thing from before. We've got clear evidence, with gender stereotyping in terms of subject choices, but we're happy to actually give schools the responsibility to give young people advice which way they should go. I'm sorry, that's a real contradiction.
Well, one of the striking things is that in the conversation that we had, the point was made spontaneously that the most effective thing to do would be to have, one of the most effective things to do would be to have powerful role models and voices from business and industry speaking to schools about the wisdom of, and speaking to students about the wisdom of following particular choices. I think it's less a matter of careers advisors and more a matter of inspirational figures from the world of science and employment.
On the computing issue,
yes.
How is the recruitment of suitably qualified computing teachers going, Secretary of State?
It could be better. There is still more to do, but I'll give you. I don't have the figures immediately to hand, but the three areas of greatest concern to me in teacher recruitment are mathematics, physics, and computing. And it's a sort of chicken and egg situation in that there are an insufficient number of people who have been studying physics. That means there are an insufficient number of physics teachers, and so on. With computing, because it's a new subject, there are particular challenges. And also, if you're gifted in this arena, then there are a huge array of tempting opportunities outside teaching. All help gratefully accepted, and how we can tackle it.
I don't have evidence. I've got a feeling you've got a problem.
It is a challenge, yes, as we say in civil service.
Siobhan.
There is no structure that is the silver bullet to improving education and schools and
Correct.
children. What concerns me about academies is the drought of new academy sponsors that are adequate or up to the task.
Yes.
Are your department experiencing difficulties in finding those sponsors? And would you say that the department is becoming more liberal in their acceptance of track record when making sponsors, giving schools to sponsors?
It's a very good point. I think we were at risk of becoming too liberal. Over the course of the last 18 months, give or take a month, one of the things that we've been concentrating on is being tougher on existing sponsors, and you will have seen one or two sponsors like AET and EACT, which I suspect expanded too fast, being told to rein in their horns. Our fault, not theirs. The second thing is there's been an energetic pursuit of more sponsors, and that is bearing fruit. I would say that some of the best sponsors are head teachers of existing high-performing schools who've taken the opportunity to set up academic chains, people like Barry Day, who we talked about earlier, or Mike Wilkins at Outwood Grange. So I think that exactly the problem that you correctly identify was identified within the department a little while ago, and we have taken action to deal with it.
Chris, you?
I just wanted to ask one final question when it comes to pupils' education in the round.
Yes.
There's obviously been a campaign by the British Heart Foundation around life-saving skills, and
Yes.
one of the Twitter questions it's asking is that life-saving skills like CPR are too vital to leave schools to decide whether they're taught. Why aren't these taught to all pupils?
Funnily enough, I learnt first aid not at school but through the Boys Brigade, and I think it's a hugely valuable skill.
It's all becoming clear.
Were you in the Boys Brigade yet? Steadfast and sure.
I was a scout.
You were in the Scouts? Okay, well I was a member of a Presbyterian organisation. So I think it's a hugely useful skill, but the reason why I mention the Boys Brigade, or indeed the Scouts, is that one mustn't overload schools by demanding and insisting that they deliver everything that is desirable. Schools are primarily academic institutions. They are primarily there in order to ensure that students acquire the skills, knowledge and qualifications to make choices as adults. The best schools will have a wide range of additional other ways of ensuring that young people grow up as wonderful citizens, but it's also important, given the welter of things that we expect of schools, that they don't feel that the government is constantly prescribing in every regard everything that a good school should do.
PFEG ran a very successful campaign on personal finance and successful in getting the curriculum to include personal finance into maths and citizenship teaching. But it seems now to be a problem in getting the funding to do the training of teachers that will be required to ensure that this personal financial education is embedded properly into maths, citizenship and effectively across the curriculum. Is this something that you're looking at, or would you look at it to make sure that these new requirements need to come in September next year, that the resources are in place to ensure that they're done well?
I hadn't to be honest, heard of that particular concern. Now that you've brought it to my attention, I absolutely will look at it.
Thank you. Alex.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to go back to the funding thing. I was very tempted to ask you if you remembered the object of the Boys Brigade, which remains ingrained in my head, but I won't. But I wanted to go back to the funding thing. And the colleges are telling me that, you know, the funding for 16 to 18-year-olds is already 22% lower than it is for 5 to 15-year-olds. And you said you would justify that. Isn't there somewhere else where we could have protected this budget for the colleges?
Possibly.
But you're not going to tell us where, or where you would rather have cut?
Well, I'm very happy to, the impact assessment, which I think I promised to share earlier, will run through some of these arguments. It's an uncomfortable question if you're going to have to cut where. We can have a broader argument about the scale of budgets, but I think all of us would accept that there have to be some reductions. And I think that this is, as I say, the least worst.
Yeah, but it's some of these 18-year-olds are come from the most difficult backgrounds, the most difficult to place, and
Yes.
they're the ones that are suffering as a result of this.
It is absolutely the case that when you reduce funding, it's going to be difficult. I think I don't want to preempt your scrutiny of the impact assessment, but once that is shared with you, then I think you'll be able to see that while it's undoubtedly not an easy decision, there are justifications for that which take account of precisely your concerns.
So you won't accept the chair's invitation to review the whole decision?
Well, what I...
Yes or no will do?
No, not at this stage, but what I would say is, having had a chance to look at the impact assessment, if you then want to invite me back and say, actually, you think that the reasoning behind this or some of the supporting documentation is erroneous, then I'd be very happy to, and I suspect David as well, actually it's my responsibility, would be happy to answer that.
Yeah. Bill already mentioned the VAT issue as far as sixth form colleges were concerned. In the Stockton Borough we have the Riverside College, which took over or amalgamated with the sixth form college. So it is now an FE college with this building that specialises particularly in sixth form. They have the advantage, the VAT advantage over another sixth form college in the area. Are you actually going to set a timescale for changing the rules on VAT for sixth forms?
I'd like to, but the Chancellor wouldn't let me.
So what are you going to do about it then? Are you going to fight the Chancellor, fisticuffs at dawn perhaps?
No, I carry on imploring and begging him to give me more money, and he carries on doing a brilliant job as steward of the public finances.
One small step might be within your power and the budget to do, and that is colleges admitted students this year.
Yes.
They have lagged funding. So not only, I mean, you've got certain free schools setting up and academies setting up who are being paid for phantom students who don't exist, and it's pretty galling then for colleges to have actual students who they don't get paid for because there's lagged funding till the year after. Now, that's a historic situation. It's been compounded by this change because they admitted students September this year on the basis that they would get the money next year, and now they're going to get a 17.5% cut next year on people they've already admitted, and there's absolutely nothing they can do to control that. It seems to me, even if that's a one-year intervention, that to ensure that they get the money that they are entirely entitled to believe they were going to get for this year's students next year would be a small token, but at least it would suggest to them that their interests were being listened to.
Let me have a look at that. It's a very fair-minded and generous suggestion.
Thank you. One last question for you, Rebecca. Are you concerned about University Technical College's ability to attract pupils?
There are some universities... Well, the short answer is yes, but more broadly, I think it's important that we analyse UTC by UTC, because I think that the principle of university technical colleges is fantastic. The reality has been expensive. The prospect of success in the future is exciting, but there have been one or two cases where recruitment has not been what we would wish it to be. But it's important, as I'm mentioning in the context of the Durham Free School and other schools, not to judge prematurely. So I think it's important to say that I have a concern, but that concern is not because I don't believe that they can be and will be successful. And if you look at the JCB UTC, it is oversubscribed and hugely successful. So there's nothing either inherent in the model or its delivery which means that the schools can't be a roaring success, but we need as ever to keep things under review.
What does that, keeping that under review, mean? Because you've talked about certain academy change which expanded
Yeah.
too fast, and their early schools were probably fantastic, otherwise they wouldn't have got that momentum. And you then intervene to restrict that. Is that something, might you, Ken Baker describes himself as an old man in a hurry, might you put the brakes on the expansion of UTCs?
Well, UTCs, like all new schools, we look at on a case-by-case basis. If every UTC proposal that comes forward is strong, then we enthusiastically back it. If a UTC proposal has potential but is not yet strong, then we let the proposer know what it is that needs to be done to encourage it. But one of the biggest champions, A, I'm a huge fan of Lord Baker. B, one of the biggest champions of UTCs, David Mellor, who is himself an Academy sponsor, is the second most recent addition to the board of the DFE as a non-executive director. I think it's the Baker Dealing Trust is an organisation, but it's not an Academy sponsor. Individual UTCs need to be looked at in their own right. Some organisations are standalone backers of UTCs. Other UTCs are part of a broader family.
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary of State, for being able to answer questions across such a broad swathe of policy. We hope you have a very happy Christmas. We thank you for being so cogent and coherent on so many areas, even if that area doesn't yet include careers, advice and guidance in schools. And on the basis that you have, as often, been prepared to listen and change your mind when challenged by evidence, and we recognise that and applaud that. We hope over Christmas you'll have time to reflect on the issues around careers and others as well. And we hope to see you again in the new year. And have a very happy Christmas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all the members of the committee.